Welcome to the Citizens Club of Springfield. I'm Joyce Narduli, President. This morning we'd like to thank our Citizens Club sponsors and partners, which includes WMAY, WUIS, the City of Springfield Audio and Visual Department of the Mayor's Office. And let's also thank this morning's coffee sponsor, Jane Ford. Let's give everyone a hand. Thank you, Jane. And by the way, we're accepting new coffee sponsors. So if you're willing and interested to do that, please see Chris Atchison in the back. I don't know, Chris, have you? That guy. Please see him. Attendance at the Citizens Club is always free, but if you'd like to support the work of our club, annual dues are $30 to become a member, and that coffee sponsorship is $100. Please talk with our treasurer if you have any questions or you'd like to join our mission for a more informed community. And we don't tell you what to think. We just instead better help you understand what we all need to be thinking about. This morning, we have an excellent panel of reporters here to analyze the November 5th election results locally, statewide, and on the national level. And Kent Redfield will moderate and introduce our panel. So Kent, take it away.
Good morning. So we have a group of experienced reporters who have been watching state government and politics in general for a long time. If you look at the promotional material and do the math, we have more than 100 years of experience in terms of watching politics. And so starting over to the far side, Bernie Schoenberg, who most of you have spent some time in Springfield, know was a longtime reporter, State House reporter, political reporter for the State Journal Register, and then Peter Hancock is, I never can get, is with a new organization, the Capital News Illinois, and while he's not been in Springfield for a long time, he was a long-time reporter in Kansas, following Kansas politics and the Kansas legislature. And then finally, Scott Reeder, who you probably, if you pick up the Illinois Times and you have been reading writing that he's been doing for the Illinois Times. I think I knew you when you were first with the small newspaper group. Yeah, a long time ago. And so I'm gonna throw out some questions. They're going to kick them around. We'll try to cover a lot of ground, and then when we get to about 20 minutes to 8 or so, then we want to talk to you and see what you all are interested in. So let's just start globally. What struck you? What surprised you out of the results of the last election?
Well,
so you need to pass back and forth.
you want to go, Scott?
Sure.
Okay.
I found that I wasn't terribly surprised with the national results. I think that there is a fundamental change happening in the electorate that I don't think a lot of political scientists have really gotten their minds around yet, or journalists for that matter. You know, in my entire life, the majority party in the United States has been the Democratic Party. There's always been more registered Democrats in the United States since 1932, the beginning of the New Deal. And for the first time this year, there are more registered Republicans. Which I think is hard for me to get the mind around in a lot of ways. I think that there's this element of populism that's been injected into the Republican Party by Donald Trump has just kind of changed the fabric of the party in a lot of ways. The dynamics of that election are just bizarre to me. I mean, everything I've learned about politics over the last 40 years seems to be stood on its head. You know, somebody who's been a convicted felon, been impeached twice, has more baggage than Samsonite, you would think would not do well. But he did well. I mean, I wasn't surprised that he won, but the traditional metrics we look for and whether a candidate will do well don't hold up when you deal with Donald Trump for whatever reason.
I would agree with that. I am kind of struck by the realignment of the parties.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was covering a state that's dominated by Republicans the same way Illinois is by Democrats, and people kept waiting for the great realignment of parties when the moderate Republicans would become Democrats, and it just keeps not happening. Instead, what we're seeing are the working class, blue-collar, non-college educated union voters becoming populist Republicans, where they used to be a big part of the Democratic base. They're now Donald Trump's base. And strangely, the Democratic Party seems to have become the party of upper middle class, college educated elites in some ways. I think what struck me at the state level more than anything else was, and you saw this nationally, almost every county in the United States and almost every county in Illinois shifted to the right. Even in areas where Donald Trump lost, he lost by less. There was just this uniform shift to the right, and yet not one legislative seat in Illinois flipped parties. And I thought you can take a couple of things away from that. Either that state politics is completely disjointed from national politics, and the people of Illinois are 100% satisfied with the state legislature that they have right now. Which I think is kind of unlikely, and I don't really expect it. Or the other thing is that they have done such a masterful job of gerrymandering the districts that it is going to take a very long time to undo it.
The reason I didn't want to go first is because I know everybody wants to hear about president, but something local struck me with this election, and it's because after I got out of University of Illinois in Champaign, my first journalism job was in Bloomington, and I started there in 1976, and I'm rolling into town. And I come from Evanston, although I've been a downstater like 45 or 50 years now, but I roll into town, and there's a billboard that says Harbor Hall, conservative Republican for McLean County. And I thought, how can anybody win an election saying that? Because when I grew up, Mayor Daley dominated dominated all the news in Chicago. Everybody in at least my part of Evanston with the littler houses was Democratic because everybody was FDR. You know, my mom came over from Europe and they all loved the New Deal and the welcoming America. So that was just a little odd. But in this election, and I guess they had been tied 10-10, but the McLean County Board is now 12 Democrats and 8 Republicans, and for the first time in any history anybody remembers, it is a Democratic county. So it went against the trend. So Brendan Moore is over here, my friend who used to work for the SJR and is now with Lee Enterprises, so he works for the Panagraph in part and has a column there, and told me part of the reason is, I guess McLean County has 46% college graduates, and there's also gerrymandering involved, but they've got Sharon Chung was able to maintain her seat in the Illinois House as a Democrat, and I guess they got Dave Kaler from Peoria in the Senate and Eric Sorensen in the 17th. They all come into Bloomington normal. So kind of a strong, a building Democratic base in a place you wouldn't expect. Other than that, I don't disagree with these folks. Another thing that, let's say it's interesting, when you listen to certain folks on the radio in Springfield, it was always like, don't tell a lie. If you lie to Bernie, one lie and nobody will trust you anymore. And then I'm thinking, and this is, Sam, who is Madonia, who is a Republican, and his dad was treasurer of the Republican Party of Sangamon County, and he used to say those things, and yet, then Donald Trump comes along, and there's a whole different kind of way to go. I thought that maybe in Sangamon County, somebody in the Republican Party would say, I don't think I like the things he's saying among the elected officials, but I'm a little surprised, I guess, except everybody doesn't want to rock the boat, and Kamala Harris was not the answer. But nobody said anything, and because in Sangamon County, I think the Republican Party has always been about jobs and contracts more than these social issues, although there's some of that. But on the other hand, the fact that the Sangamon County Republican Party brings people like Tom Homan this year and Candace Owens a few years ago to their annual fundraising dinner gets everybody from Quincy to come over here and make a lot of money for the party and say the most MAGA things you can, including that, COVID is a hoax. Thank you, Candace Owens, after Rosemary Long passed away from COVID as the wonderful chairwoman of the Republican Party. The party just kind of goes along with it, and that surprised me a little that I didn't hear any voices opposed to that.
Any follow-up rejoinders?
I was a little surprised too. I kept, during the presidential debate, I kept waiting for somebody to say 1 million Americans died under the previous, when Trump was in office before. But I think COVID became so politicized. The very idea of wearing face masks became so politicized. Personally, I've been trying to block it out of my mind, just that whole year and a half, 2-year period. And I think maybe everybody else is too. And it just wasn't an issue that Democrats wanted to revisit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the elephant in the room, so to speak, here, that one of the problems is, I have to say, I think that Joe Biden's leaving the race late was certainly a disadvantage for Harris. But to be very honest with you, she might have made a very good president, but she wasn't a very good candidate. And I say that, when you look at the traditional metrics, I mean, she outraised, fundraised Trump 3-1. I mean, she had a very good ground game from what all I've read. I mean, compared to a president that really didn't have much of a ground game as far as people going out and doing door to door, that sort of thing. She had the traditional things organizationally that would bode well for somebody winning, but she didn't, and I think she just had trouble getting traction. And I think that she wasn't a particularly gifted campaigner. And unfortunately, you can be a very good policymaker, but not be a very good campaigner. And I think that that's one of the disadvantages of having somebody that doesn't go through the primary process is, the primary process is all about campaigning. And when you don't put somebody through that process, they really aren't vetted by the voters to be a person that can maybe has the best electability.
So, yeah. So we talked a little bit about demographics and what's happening with the bases and those kinds of things. And now we talked a little bit about candidates and campaigns. What do you think the lessons are that, let's start national. What should the Democrats and the Republicans be taking away if you're the new RNC, DNC kind of person, or a congressional leader? What should we take away from this in terms of what how should the party, either Republicans solidify the trends or Democrats, find ways to reverse the trends?
Everybody on TV, radio, and in newspapers is trying to answer this question because nobody knows. And as Scott and Peter both alluded to already, Democrats used to be the party of the working class. The working class feels left behind. Interestingly, Donald Trump, who lives some levels above most working class folks, is the person that lately speaks to a lot of folks, and they think that he represents them more than the Democrats who perhaps, a lot of the moderate Democrats are saying, let's quit talking about all the different groups we're helping. Let's quit talking about, we're helping black people, and we're helping, Asian people, and we're helping poor people, and we're helping prisoners. And obviously, the most effective ad for the Republicans, it seems, on the Trump level, was one that I think was not horrible for what it says, but horrible for the context around it, which was, she's for they, them, and Trump is for you and your family, because they, them is transgender people, because they caught Kamala Harris when she was running as a super progressive for president 5 years ago, saying, yeah, if you're a prisoner and you want a transgender operation to change your sex, we should pay for it. And nobody, that's a very effective political ad. Apparently $100 million or more was spent on that ad. But that comes after the almost non-problem of trans kids playing sports, which Donald Trump would say all the time, and Republicans were talking about, and Nancy Mace in Congress now says, I don't want the new transgender member of Congress to be able to use the bathroom. I know 4 families with trans kids, and it's not an easy decision to change your identity, and for it to become political fodder is terrible. But so I don't know where this goes, but Democrats have to reestablish the fact that they're for everybody in the middle class, as Kamala Harris tried to say, but just saying you're going to give new businesses $50,000, it didn't do it in the 100 days that she had to campaign. And we're going to see where both parties go, because Trump made all kinds of promises. I'm going to cut gas prices. I mean, he would just say kind of anything. I'm going to cut gas prices in half. Inflation will be down. And then we will, I hope things like that are good. But with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in charge, I don't know where it's going. Everybody has to go to the voters that they lost. Democrats have lost a lot of people, and I did think in the middle of the campaign I would see Trump signs in rural and some urban areas downstate, and I think, what is Kamala Harris saying that's going to change any of these people's minds? And as I was going along, I couldn't really think of it. I couldn't see that they were coming off the dime, no matter what Trump said about eating dogs and cats in a different Springfield.
I'm struck by a couple of things. We're trying to figure out what did Donald Trump say that seemed to resonate with the majority of people. I just looked, votes are still being counted. They're still coming in, especially from the West Coast, where most of the election is done by mail ballot. And when I checked this morning, Trump had exactly 50% of the vote. Nationally, Kamala Harris had, I think, 48.6. So you're talking about a margin of 1.6%. The thing was that the Democrats won huge margins in California, Oregon, Washington, New England, New York. There's this whole middle America, including us outside of Chicago, that is all red. And it struck me that, Donald Trump campaigned in New York City, knowing that he wasn't going to win New York City. But nonetheless, he was there in the Bronx, he was there in Queens, and he was talking to people, and he increased his margins among Hispanic voters, among African-American voters, especially African-American men, at least based on what we know so far from the exit polls. And I would dare to say you could probably count on both hands the number of seconds that Kamala Harris spent looking at Oklahoma from out the window of her private jet as she flew over it on her way somewhere else. I mean, Democrats, there's this whole part of America that Democrats, I think, have just decided that's not us. Those aren't our people. We're not going to spend any time talking to Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana and Oklahoma and Kansas and North Dakota. They've just kind of written that off as Republican territory. It's America. Those people are Americans, and you have to be able to talk to them. Even if you don't win majorities there, you have to be able to talk to those people. And I've heard former Congresswoman Sherry Bustos make the same argument because she represented a largely a district of Western Illinois that was largely rural, medium-sized towns, Quad Cities area, saying that Democrats have to do a better job of talking to rural America. Even if you're going to lose rural America, just don't get creamed there. Put out some sort of effort to talk to those people. That's one of the lessons that I took away from it.
I've written about this before, but I think it's a good analogy, but a good example of what's been trending in the Democratic Party. That's in the early 2000s. I was reporter for a small newspaper group, and I had a niece that was working on the campaign for Congressman Lane Evans, a fellow I've known for many years, has covered as a young reporter in the Quad Cities. In fact, I worked with Sherry Bustos for 10 years at the Quad City Times. She's an old friend, and I've talked to her about the election in the last couple of weeks. There was a group, like many congressional campaigns, they brought in kids from college kids to work the campaign, and Evans's campaign brought in kids that were working, were from basically elite coastal universities, places like Stanford and Dartmouth and other places, to work the campaign. You know, he was a progressive Democrat. He fit with their image, and they brought him down to hear him speak at Democrat Day at the State Fair. And I'm just standing there next to him, and as the group's letting out, these kids are making fun of all these people walking by wearing trucker hats and work boots and saying, well, I guess they're a different kind of Democrat, and really showing like they like guns. How can they be a Democrat? I mean, this is the kind of things they were saying out loud and joking amongst themselves, really within earshot of some of these people walking by. And to me, that kind of personifies the problem that's happened within the Democratic Party. Is they've been losing touch with working people. That used to be who they were. And until you can reconnect with folks, I mean, people can spot disdain a mile away. I mean, and have, I just think that is the problem. Sherry and I were talking, I said, do you think that the Democratic Party is viewed as elitist? And she said, yes, that's a real problem. We are viewed in many ways as being elitist. When the Farm Bill came up 4 years ago, there were a lot of urban Democratic House members are saying, why should we support the Farm Bill? Those are all Trump people. Well, you eat, don't you? This is the kind of the problem that we're having is I think the Democratic Party is losing sight of who they've traditionally served, and I think that they need to refocus on that. Bill Clinton was wonderful at doing that. I mean, he knew how to campaign. He campaigned with empathy. He could, it became almost a joke. I can feel your pain, but he could he could campaign well, and he did well in red states. What are red states now, I guess? We weren't always red states then, but he could do well with the working class as well as with elites. So, that's what comes to my mind.
Okay, so we're talking about this in terms of a national context. Let's talk a little bit about from a state context. And so, the numbers I have, Paris carried Illinois by about 11%. Now, that's about 6% less, about 400,000 votes less than what happened 4 years ago. But we're still talking about, an 11% victory, 54.8 to 43.8. Donald Trump's vote in Illinois, the last total that we have, he lost 2,000 votes. His total for 2024 was 2,000 votes less than what he got in 2020. So, his campaign did not move the needle at all. The Democrats lost. A lot of people didn't show up. There's no indication, they all went out and voted for, for a Republican. Then when we look at county government in the northeastern Illinois, the Democrats have majorities in the DuPage County Board, the Lake County Board, and the Will County Board, and the Kane County Board. Out of those traditional collar counties, only McHenry still has a Republican majority. And we know there's a lot of gerrymandering, but the congressional and the legislative are overwhelmingly Democratic. So if we're the Republican Party in Illinois, what are we doing wrong? Or conversely, what is the Republican Party in Illinois, or Democratic Party in Illinois doing right?
You want me to start? I think the biggest problem the Republican Party has is that it lost a sight with suburban voters. I mean, and it's gotten itself into a spiral. When you lose people, campaigns are won or lost on the margins. I mean, it's a toss-up districts that can go either way, are where they're lost. And as the Republicans have lost suburban districts, they've lost moderate people in the legislature, and they become increasingly more conservative. And when that happens, who are you fielding for candidates for statewide office who are becoming increasingly more conservative because you become more inward looking as opposed to, gosh, we're in this situation. Maybe we should look for people that don't think quite like us because we're losing, But that's kind of the mindset that gets in. I mean, when I came and started covering the legislature, there were a fair number of suburban Republican lawmakers who were pro-choice. Now there's not a single pro-choice Republican in the legislature. There is a lot of issues. I say this as somebody who's going to spend the rest of today when I get out of here and tomorrow sitting in a deer blind. But guns are a very polarizing issue in Illinois, and the Republicans that are running in the burbs tend to be very pro gun owner rights. Well, that doesn't play in the burbs that great. I mean, you need to be able to elect a more diverse, Ronald Reagan talked about the big tent. You want to have you win elections by addition, not subtraction. And they are not attracting candidates that are running on positions within the suburbs in particular that are appealing to voters. I mean, I think that's the bottom line.
I would agree with that. I think one of the huge trends that people are going to remember about this point in history is how Republicans lost the suburbs. And it wasn't just the collar counties around Illinois, although that's a classic example of it. I watched it happen in suburban Kansas City. It has happened in suburban Philadelphia. It's happened in major metropolitan areas all over America. And trying to figure out why that is, I think, it's like the suburbs, it's not your father's Oldsmobile anymore. The suburbs, were built by upper middle class white people who didn't want to send their kids to school with urban black kids. In 1940s, 50s, 60s. People getting out of the urban core, they wanted lawns, they wanted, whatever it was, the materialistic middle class life. You're now looking at, the grandchildren of those people are now becoming voting age, the Gen Z generation, and they're different. And they, like Scott was saying, the abortion issue, abortion has really sorted the two parties more than any other single issue. I mean, it's the one thing where if you tell me your position on abortion, I can probably tell you which political party you lean to. And for whatever reason, the Republicans have become the anti-abortion party, and that has alienated a lot of suburban women, especially young women under the age of 35. I watched what happened in Kansas right after Roe v. Wade was overturned. When the Dobbs decision came out, they had that came out in like June or July of 22. Kansas had their primary in August of 22, and there was already a ballot issue on the ballot that would have given the legislature more authority to regulate abortion, overturning a state Supreme Court decision. And it shocked the nation that that ballot issue failed miserably in Kansas, where everybody thought it would at least be close. It failed miserably, and it failed in the suburbs. It failed in rural areas. It was shocking, and yet those same people will vote Republican. They reelected their same Republicans state legislature just a few months later that November. So anyway, rambling here, but I think Scott's right. One of the things the Republicans need to deal with the fact that they've lost the suburbs, and they need to get the suburbs back if you're going to have any chance in Illinois. Somebody told me Illinois is divided by Interstate 80. There are like 10 million people north of I-80, 3 million people south of I-80. You're not going to become the majority party in Illinois appealing only to those 3 million people on the south end of the interstate.
And as Peter said, I'll continue that. I'll quote a newer radio host. You can tell how I spend some of my time. Patrick Finkston has been on the radio in the morning on WMAY 92.7 FM for several weeks, replaced where Greg Bishop used to be, Greg of don't wear a mask and vaccines might not work kind of fame. But Finkston is a former Republican who wouldn't ever vote for Harris, but said Darren Bailey is not the answer for Illinois Republicans to gain anything back. Because Darren Bailey, who uses his gun to shoot the state budget, that doesn't impress folks in the suburbs. It scares the heck out of them. And he also was the one that called Chicago the hellhole during an entire campaign for governor, which didn't help the Republican Party at all. And so those who want the Republican Party to be more severe and MAGA that doesn't seem to be the way to go in Illinois. On the Democratic side, I'll agree with Scott. You know, the base has been lost, but I got to say there are people in the party. Nikki Budzinski, I think, is very similar to Sherry Bustos in reaching out to both sides. She would care a lot about the farm bill.
Yeah, she would
you know.
very much so.
So it depends on the place. Obviously, her district was cut to elect a Democrat and brings in all of the Democratic areas of 3 or 4 cities. But, you know, Democrats do have to show they care about and act like it. And Republicans, you know, need to come back to being kind of the business-oriented Republican Party of old, or I'm not sure where their future is in Illinois, even though they did gain some this year. After 4 more years of a Trump term, and we'll see what happens on the federal level, no matter who the Attorney General is, I don't know if the glow of the increasing GOP strength will continue. I will say Mark Batnick, a former state representative who's a pollster now, was on Fingston's show the other day and talked about how Republicans made gains in Will County. You know, people are growing in some areas of the suburbs. So the state is still in play. I mean, we're such a Democratic state now, but for most of my career in town, we had 26 years in a row of Republican governors. So, you know, things can change in sometimes radical ways when you don't expect it.
Sure. So we're talked about the last election, but you know, obviously we now need to talk about the next election, which are more specifically, what does just, you know, the 2024 in totality, what does that do to the political futures of J.B. Pritzker and Senator Durbin? And do the Republicans have any answers in terms, is this just a primary fight, or do we have a possibility of having real competition statewide when we get to 2024?
Well, let's see. Senator Durbin did an interview with the Tribune recently. Our friend Rick Pearson saying, you know, he'll have to kind of see how things go if he wants to run again. He has been in for a very long time. I covered his, you know, races for the House and then the Senate. Was it 84 that he won? It's been a long time, so I wouldn't be surprised if he made a decision to open the field, but we will see what happens there. There's a congressman in the suburbs, Raja Krishnamurthy, who once ran for statewide office. Was it comptroller? Or, yeah. Thank you, Brendan. He's who has a lot of, like, millions of dollars in his fund and might well run. You know, there would be other people clearly getting in the mix. We don't know what. I mean, Alexei Giannoulias just got elected to Secretary of State, so we'll see what's happening. In fact, somebody in Chicago just interviewed him about talk that he should run for mayor of Chicago in 3 more years. So we'll see, because the mayor of Chicago situation is a little rough, but that's a different cycle. As far as Pritzker, you know, 2 sides to this question. Does he want to be governor again if they have to do either a tax increase or cuts in the budget that will be difficult this year? Hard to say. On the other hand, if you do run for re-election and win again, and it doesn't seem unlikely that that could happen again, it's probably a better base from which to run for national office if you are a sitting governor. So you can speculate too.
I was thinking a lot about J.B. Pritzker. Some of you may have noticed that it was Thursday, November 7th. He came out and did his post-election press conference. And it was really a combative, drawing a line in the sand sort of statement. If you want to touch the people of Illinois, you have to go through me. A lot of people saw that as his first presidential news conference for the 2028 campaign. And so the question is, clearly he has ambition for a higher office. Does he want to run as a sitting governor, or does he want to run as a rather successful former governor? And I think Bernie makes the good point that the next couple of years are going to be tough. He was successful in his first term up so far because Illinois had a failing state government, but there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. just passing a basic balanced state budget. While in Illinois seems like a major accomplishment, in most other states it is not. It's just kind of the bare minimum of what's expected. So, his first term, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit, and of course, legalizing recreational marijuana was popular. The capital program was popular. You can always, people love roads and bridges, and they love the jobs that come with it. That was low-hanging fruit. Now they're staring down the barrel end of a $3 billion budget deficit. They're going to have to make some serious decisions about education spending, about funding pensions, about healthcare spending, the stuff that really affects people's daily lives. So the next couple of years may not be real easy for J.B. Pritzker. As far as Dick Durbin goes, I would not be surprised if, especially in light of an unfriendly Trump administration coming in and him being now the minority whip, which is not that glamorous of a position, if he decided, to hang it up and pass the torch to a new generation. He has certainly earned the right to do that if he wants to do it. At some point, he's going to have to retire anyway, and it might be an opportune time for him to start priming, getting a new generation up to speed.
20 years ago when I was a reporter in Iowa, or a little over, I should say 25 years ago when I was a reporter in Iowa, people were saying, when do you think Chuck Grassley's going to retire? I mean, those, once you get in the Senate and you have a safe seat, it is really hard for some people to let go. I am not absolutely convinced that Durbin will retire out. I could see him. Yeah, well, I think Grassley's going to retirement is going to be him being carried out on a gurney. I mean, I don't. I mean, I just. But I just think that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Durbin runs again. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't. The one thing I feel pretty certain on is Pritzker wants to run for president. Now, whether he wants to run for governor along the way, again, I don't know. Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter successfully ran for president as former governors. George W. Bush ran for president as a sitting governor. As far as a fundraising base, given Pritzker's enormous wealth, I don't think that that's going to be much of a consideration. Is he going to get more national headlines being a governor or a former governor? I don't know. And the media landscape has changed so much. I don't know how much of an advantage it is being in public office when you run for national office, like in his particular case. But who knows?
Yeah, Bernie has.
Yeah,
Bernie has.
yeah, I would
About
just,
to go to questions.
yeah,
Bernie has.
before that, I would echo the media landscape is so different now that half the country watches one kind of news and half the country watches another, and people are often not getting the same information and are getting it through very different filters. Considering like in almost every Springfield gathering you go to, because of the size of the family, there are at least two Langfelders in this audience right now. And sorry, Josh, about the 31 vote difference with Frank Lesko taking over, and we'll see how that transition goes. And the former mayor is here also, so welcome to them both. It was just something else that was interesting in this election locally, and that Scott has something about in the Illinois Times this week. But Frank Valla, the airport chairman that Jim Langfelder tried to replace with Mike Houston, which didn't work, spent about $50,000 on the race for mayor to help Misty Buscher beat Jim Langfelder. And Frank Valla, who has several businesses, also spent about $40,000 to help Frank Lesko become our next recorder for as long as that office stays there. And we'll see if Frank will, how he will actually get rid of it. But Frank Valla, through Timber Ridge Properties, which is the old Ajeezy farm he owns, gave $10,000 in December of 23 to Frank Lesko. And then Frank Valla himself gave $6,000 at that time. Timber Ridge Properties gave another $10,000 in September. And then when this really tough ad. Of course, the whole idea of hire me to fire me that Frank Lesko ran on didn't show up until about 2 or 3 weeks before the election. So that was one ad. But then there was another ad about how Josh Langfelder has taken so much money from taxpayers because he's had a job there for 20 years. And Frank Lesko has also had jobs in government for 20 plus years. Beside the fact that that ad was paid for by the Evening Republican Club. I looked at the time and they had about $900 in their fund. But then a couple days later, Frank Vella donated $13,700 to the Evening Republican Club. So we topped 40,000. I called Frank Valla before saying this publicly because that's just the way I roll. And he said it was all about good government and trying to, combine offices and save money. However, Scott's story indicates there was a sharper edge with a Langfelder-Valla angle. Just something to know, it's so Springfield.
Okay, so we are about to go to questions and
the president.
Disclaimer, everything said up here has nothing to do with the Citizens Club, so just so you know. We don't take credit for any of that. Thank you, everyone. That was a really great political update, so it's been fun. As you know, when we turn the audience questions over to you, we'd like you to stand up and say your name, and don't give us a speech, just ask a question, please.
What she said.
Do I have to stand up? Yes. It's very hard.
You can be fine.
I can sit, okay. I would like you guys to take a shot. Oh, Carol Sutton, longtime member of the club, original board member. Up to and including Election Day, the pollsters, the experts were telling us it's a dead heat. It's a razor-thin margin. How could so many people who claim to know what they're talking about been so wrong? Because I know a couple of them I've read have just said, I'm not doing polling anymore. I'm going to go shine shoes or something. I mean, they all need honest work.
I think one of the answers is, I watch a lot of TV and listen to a lot of radio, and one of the posters said it takes sometimes, and I think I heard 20 calls to get somebody to answer the phone. And then, of course, it used to be landlines, so you knew who was there. Of course, if you called during the day, you were getting retired people. Now, everybody has cell phones. They change numbers. Who knows how they're finding these people? They keep trying to change the model to make it right. Again, during this campaign, I kept thinking to myself, what is going to make somebody with a Trump flag outside their house want to vote for Kamala Harris? And I didn't see it happening. So I don't, minds may not have been changed. Clearly, what Trump was saying did change minds, at least for the people who may not listen all the time. They heard bits and pieces, and they liked what they heard. So I don't know. Polling is evolving, and it's crazy, and I would never want to do it, and I hate reading them, too, because that's what professors do.
I'm going to tell you. Professor Redfield can, I think, back me up on this. Polls are based on the science of sampling. You sample registered voters, you sample what you think are likely voters. The goal is to sample the population of people who are actually going to cast ballots. Problem is, you don't know who those people are until after they have cast the ballots. So you don't know. You use all kinds of modeling and guesswork about who's going to turn out. One of the things about Donald Trump and Trumpism is that he brings people to the polls, low propensity voters, people who don't, they don't show up in polls because nobody thinks they're going to vote, or they think that there's a low chance that they're going to vote. And I think that it was what pollsters have been dealing with since 2016, is that he appeals to people who don't necessarily show up in polls. I was starting to sense toward the end of the campaign, it was razor thin. And by the way, go back to what I said at the beginning, the actual margin appears to have been about 1.5% nationwide. So it was much closer than the Electoral College would tend to indicate. But those polls, they have a margin of error, plus or minus 4%. And I was starting to think, well, what if they're all 4% off and they're all off in the same direction? You know, we could have a 4 or 5% election, even though in the polls it shows it's just going to be razor thin. So, you know, from an electoral college standpoint, it wasn't that close, but nationwide, on a popular vote standpoint, it was actually pretty close.
And I would agree with that. I think the other thing that is worth keeping in mind is, where did the Trump campaign exert its effort? Traditionally, at the end of a campaign, they try to get the undecided voters, the soccer mom who's maybe socially conservative but wants, more funding for education or whatever. They'll focus on them, and they'll try to persuade them to come over one way or the other. The Trump campaign just pretty much abandoned trying to get the unpersuaded voter this time around. They went to their base, and they really, as Peter said, went over to the low propensity voter. They wanted people that already liked Donald Trump but didn't usually show up to vote for him. They got to turn out and vote. And I think that is why you're seeing the polls be so hard to figure out. I mean, it was 1.5% nationally, but when you look at those toss-up states, the 7 toss-up states, I think, it was razor thin in most of them. I mean, polling is not easy to do, and when you're trying to figure out not just who are people going to vote for, but who's going to show up, and you have somebody that doesn't usually show up for the polls. Will they show up this time? I sure wouldn't want to be doing polling. I mean, I can tell you that right now.
A question toward the front.
Hello, John Kierkessner, University of Illinois. You talked about Harris not being a good candidate and that Trump reached his people. That being, I think, the big interaction with their parties. Trump said whatever he wanted. The Republican Party could not control how he reached out. Harris spoke the Democratic Party line. Is there a chance that we will see a Harris in 2028 who actually speaks as the strong, intelligent woman she is, instead of toting the party line? Trump catered to his supporters. Harris did not.
I don't have a crystal ball, but I would be very surprised if Harris were to run again. Of course, then again, Nixon in 1968, people said he was done for, and he won. So it can happen. I think that she had a lot of burdens going in, not the least of which, how do you run as a candidate of change when you're the sitting vice president of an unpopular president? How do you explain you're continually saying you have faith in the competence of Joe Biden when he did such a disastrous debate performance, and anybody can see that he is really aging rapidly. I mean, but more than that, I don't think she's a very good campaigner. You can be a very good governing official. You can be a very talented person who can get policy done and still not be a very appealing person to voters. And she, I use the Bill Clinton example. He could make a crowd just melt in his hands. They loved him. Harris never really was able to develop that. And, I don't, the opposite, Bill Clinton's wife is the absolute opposite. I mean, she had a hard time connecting with voters as well. So I just think that she wasn't a great candidate. That doesn't mean she's not a good person. Doesn't mean she wasn't couldn't have been a good president. It just means that she wasn't a particularly good candidate.
Question to the back.
Kamala Harris ran for Attorney General in California. She'd been a prosecutor, and she had one public persona in those campaigns. She ran for president in 2020 as a progressive left-wing liberal. She didn't make it to the Iowa caucuses. She runs in 2024, and granted, she had a very abbreviated campaign because it took so long to convince Joe Biden that he shouldn't run. And so she became more of a traditional moderate Democrat. I think you can only reinvent yourself so many times unless you're Cher. It just, in politics, I think if she runs again as yet another kind of Democrat, I think it's going to be difficult. I'm not saying she won't do it again, but and another thing about Democrats is that they tend to eat their young. When John Kerry lost the presidency, that's pretty much, well, I guess he was Secretary of State or something, but they just don't run again after that.
I just think it's weird that the most damaging interview she did was on The View, when she said she couldn't think of anything that she would do differently from Joe Biden. But I also think she did energize crowds a lot, and people lined up for blocks to see her, too. So she needed to communicate better in certain ways. But, there was a base that was very excited about her for a long period of time, well, within 100 days.
Senator Klickner, I would like for you all to give us advice. You try to have a conversation with people, and they're like, I don't want to talk politics. And to me, it's current events. But they won't engage, and they won't engage with facts. So what advice do you have for us so that we can have good conversation with people who may not be on the same political side, but should be interested in the factual side? And with that, I'll just make a comment as a former teacher. I guess we're going to be adding wrestling to our standards.
Here's what I would say, and you shouldn't talk personalities, talk about underlying issues. And, a family member of mine who doesn't live in Sangamon County was very critical of me a while back because I went back to my hometown and I purchased ceiling fans from a family business there. And she said, well, why would you buy from him? He's a MAGA supporter. I won't do any business with him. I won't have anything to do with him. And I'm sitting there like, well, do you have any idea how the CEO of Lowe's and Menards, where you do go and buy stuff, voted? I don't. But to me, when you shut off somebody like that and refuse to interact with them, and you don't listen to what their concerns are, because let's be very honest. I mean, my wife and I are small business people here in the community. There's some real concerns out there dealing with small business that need to be addressed. There are concerns that of rural voters. I mean, that feel like they're being overlooked. I live in a rural school district. You brought up education. I mean, I think we have 26 kids that graduated the other year. For a long time, they didn't have any college preparatory classes in that school district. Those are issues that are important to people in those communities. And talk about those issues rather than talk about the personality of the people at the top that can be rather divisive.
I have a 10-second point because Joyce is really getting ready to close the meeting at the appointed hour, but it doesn't always work. You have to have somebody open to it, but people that I disagree with, I still believe in newspapers. Find a good column that's not too long, that makes some points you want to make, and leave it for them, or send it to them, because maybe that way, without the heat of a conversation, you can get some points across with evidence that's well backed up from a source that maybe both sides can trust.
Thank you again. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to the panel. I'm sorry we don't have more time for questions, but they aren't leaving until they get past you. So you
Okay.
might want to ask another question of them before they go. Our next meeting is going to be Friday, December 13. So that's not the typical fourth Friday, but because of the holidays, we're moving it up. So please mark your calendars accordingly. At 8 a.m., we're going to be hearing a presentation on Compass for Kids. And I think Molly Barad is in the room. She is the CEO and the founder of Compass. It's a school program during the summer for children in District 186, and Jennifer Gill will also be on our panel, as well as Terrence Jordan. He's the coordinator of all the summer programming that happens here in Springfield for District 186. So they have some exciting news to tell us about a national award that they have just won, as well as how they lift up children who are at risk and helping them to succeed. So please, again, mark your calendars for Friday, December 13, right here at 8 a.m., and plan to join us for a very enlightening program. And with that, thank you all for coming today. Have a very happy Thanksgiving.